Olia Hercules, what a joy to have you on the podcast. And we've had many technical challenges, and now we're going to, I hope, get more to the heart of you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Olia Hercules. I am an author and a chef, originally from Ukraine, but also British, as I've been living in the UK for 22 years.
And an activist.
And an activist, yeah.
So we met after the war had started for the Good Grief Festival. I interviewed you before, and it's a conversation that has stayed with me. You stayed with me.
Thank you. And you stayed with me and you helped me a lot. It was an hour, but you've said some things and suggested some names and some reading, and I did do it. And it did help me really a lot. And I've listened to your podcast and have seeked out other podcasts on psychology and on resilience. And yeah, I'm doing much better than when you saw me straight after the full-scale invasion began.
Yes, well, I'm glad to hear that. So the question, as you'll know, is what is a particular challenge you are facing or have faced?
So 3 years ago, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine happened, and my family, my parents, but also my extended family and my friends have lost their homes. My hometown is still occupied.
Your house is occupied by Russians,
my
isn't it? Your
my
own home.
my own home is still occupied by Russians, and I actually still have friends living in occupation now. And my brother's on the front line. And we found out that my son has Fragile X syndrome, and so do I. And my early menopause started, so it's one thing on top of the other. So there are a lot of challenges.
There are a lot of challenges, and people often talk about, I feel like I'm living in a war zone. And I guess when I was thinking about you, I was thinking you're living in a war zone at a distance from a war zone, and that has its own particular challenges. And we'll talk about Fragile X and your son. But if we start with how it is that you both kind of navigate holding yourself together, raising funds for protective gear for the army, and stay sane. How do you, or try to stay sane? What are the things that are difficult and what helps you?
So it's been a real learning curve in the last 3 years. And I remember the first time when we spoke that I couldn't say a sentence without kind of bursting into tears. Everything just felt so incredibly raw, and it felt like there will never be light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Or safety.
Or safety, yeah. So I was just in the state of fight constantly, fight or flight. And I was in a state of this very intense kind of fight. And then Russia kept bombing Ukraine. And I think it was in 2023 in August when they bombed the children's hospital in Kiev and a cancer hospital for children in Kiev. And that really just, I think, destroyed quite a few of us mentally, both people in Ukraine and us who are experiencing vicarious trauma on the outskirts of it all, kind of thing.
And I can see the distress is still in your body, just the memory of it from 2023.
Yeah. And when that happened, I guess I had a bit of a mental breakdown. And even if I tried to take care of myself before then, I realized that I wasn't doing enough, and that if I don't do something, I will not survive.
Can you describe the mental breakdown? What happened to you? What was your experience of that?
Apart from the obvious things like crying and not sleeping and feeling just completely annihilated inside. And again, just not being able to grasp any hope. You felt very hopeless, and that's a very dangerous place to find yourself in.
Yeah, that hopelessness. And it sounds like in that kind of breakdown, there's a breakdown of connection with yourself. There's like the schism between a body that is breathing, but a sense of yourself that is shattered, that is in shards inside, and you don't know who you are or what to hold on to. There's nothing that's coherent. It's so scattered and fragmented and broken in a way.
I even had an actual image in my head. I'm quite a visual person, and I had an image of if my head was made out of loads of pixels, it felt like the head wasn't there anymore. It was just kind of exploding into the air with all of these fragments just going out. And I was desperately trying to kind of cling on to them and put it all back together. That's what it felt like in a visual sense. And so when this event happened, I thought that in order to be able to take care of my family in Ukraine, but also my small children,
Yeah, you've got two sons.
yeah, I have two sons, that I had to do something fast. So I phoned my GP immediately, actually, and I asked him for help. And he heard in my voice that it was serious. And,
The
immediately
terror was in your voice, wasn't it?
it
I guess.
was, yeah, the terror was in my voice. So, yeah, so I started talking therapies, which helped. I had a really, really good woman, Elise, that
Great.
helped me. So we did it for almost a year. And then after that, something came back from what used to happen to me in my 20s, which is this very intense sleep paralysis, which is
Terrifying.
extremely terrifying. So it's when you go to sleep, from what I understand, you're kind of stuck in a space where you're not quite asleep and you're not quite awake. And I actually started having audio hallucinations, what it felt like. So I knew I was in my room and I was asleep, but it was a really strange kind of thing. And then I heard these noises coming out of the window, explosions and women shouting and shooting. It was very real and very, very loud, very overwhelming. And I've researched this kind of condition afterwards, and it says that it's probably 2 minutes or even less when this kind of thing occurs, but it felt like it was 40 minutes or so. And I was alone at home. My husband wasn't there, as in my children were downstairs, and I just had this terror where I knew I was kind of dreaming, but also it was absolutely terrifying, these noises. And I said, what if I'm not dreaming? What if it is happening and I need to run downstairs and save my kids? And that kept on occurring. And that was, yeah, I just did not know how to deal with that kind of thing. And it kept coming back, and it was also always an audio thing. Very, very terrifying.
I mean, it sounds like a sort of sleep trauma where it's kind of more intense than a nightmare, where you're actually thrown into versions of what the images, I guess, you see on the news or you hear from your family. And, sleep, we try and process memories, don't we? With REM sleep, we try and process, but in some way the re-terrorized in your sleep, and then it's a loop that you got stuck in. I haven't heard that very often, I must say. It's very rare, I think.
For me, it used to be visual. When it happened in my 20s, there would be, some kind of a presence in the room, and I would feel it, and that tightness on the chest, all of that was happening. But yes, since that bombing of the cancer hospital, it suddenly shifted and became audio, and it just kept going back. One day, it was just this demonic kind of music coming out of the window. It's always the same window as well, upstairs in the loft, where it kept occurring. It was a really intense experience, yes. So I thought maybe it's some kind of a strange version of PTSD, or I still don't know what it is, to be honest with you. So yeah.
How do you still have them? Have you found a way of coping with them?
I haven't had them for a few months. The way that I cope with them is that I actually started reading quite a lot of Carl Jung and
Yeah.
listening to this Jungian life podcast, which is happening,
Mm.
and really trying to analyze my dreams and to think about them, just trying
From a distance.
yes, trying to process them, and that helped. And in general, I just kind of created a rule for myself where I absolutely must find time every single day to do something for myself. We call it self-care this time.
You
But
shake your shoulders, but
self-care, it's just something that we all kind of have a responsibility, I think, to find, just do something for ourselves, especially women, I find, especially perhaps if you're a mother as well. Because if I realize that if I don't do it, then I can't take care of anyone else.
And self-care sounds like you're just a sort of luxuriating,
Yeah,
putting oil on
that's
your
why I
face.
shrugged my shoulders. Yeah.
Yeah. But what you actually mean is that you need a strategy that actually takes you back into the safety of your being, into the safety of your home, where you're not focused out, where you can connect with love, with your children, with the things that soothe you. Because without that, if you don't actually target yourself in a way with safety and security and groundedness, it escalates and you go crazy.
That's absolutely right. So for me, it was embroidery, also because it's very deep in Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian
Culture.
tradition. So I do something that I called automatic embroidery. I don't draw
A
any
picture.
lines. I just start going with needle and thread and just let it take me to wherever it goes. So it's not an artwork that I
Free flow.
would this. It's a free flow thing just for me. Just putting that needle in and taking it out of the other side and seeing all of these colorful patterns emerging that has really had an incredible effect on me. And I try to do it in the evening. So I put my phone into a drawer. As soon as I pick up my son at 5 o'clock, I try my best. I just lock my phone away. I don't look at it. I spend time with him. I put him to bed. And then it's my time. And I sit there and I embroider, or sometimes I pick up a brush and I do some painting or some drawing, or I paint the door in my kitchen. So I've been reconnecting with Ukrainian kind of art traditions, which feels doubly kind of effective because I'm keeping those traditions alive for me, for myself and my family, because obviously my children are observing me do all of this. And also for myself, this eye to hand coordination and just being truly in the moment, it really has helped me.
That's so beautiful and so powerful. And it's like every stitch, you kind of stitch yourself together, but you stitch yourself together from a long line of women, probably, who've stitched themselves through your culture, through generations, and making something from nothing, having a blank piece of material, a piece of thread and a needle, and then making something that has a shape, has a color that you've made is, I guess, is the opposite of craziness. It's
Right.
sanity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it absolutely is. And another one I mentioned about painting the door in my kitchen. In Ukraine, we have this old tradition where before each religious holiday, but I imagine that it went all the way back to pre-Christian times, people would lime wash the walls inside their house so they're beautiful and shiny blue, you know, like a canvas. And then they would make the paints as well out of the, plants in the garden
Berries.
and berries and
Yeah.
stuff. And they would start painting the walls. And then they would say, because during the holidays, it's not only benevolent spirits that come, but also the bad spirits, evil spirits. And all of these flowers and worlds would suck in those bad spirits. But of course, it's, bad energy as well. I suppose you can interpret it in different ways. And the interesting thing about this is after the holiday, they would they would lime wash everything again, making
To
everything.
start anew.
Yeah, it's a regenerative thing. And you'd think, oh, you've created something beautiful, but then you start all over again. And for me, that was also a very helpful technique because my door now is very textured because I've repainted 5 times already, to the dismay of my husband, who says, no, your first design was amazing. I'm like, it's not about the design, it's about just redoing it time after time. So I keep the design until I feel like I've reached another point where I'm not okay, and I paint it over and I start a new pattern.
That's so beautiful. And I've been reading a book by a very brilliant potter called Edmund de Waal, and it's called The Archive. And where what you're saying takes me is that he goes into archives to find something, and then he sees that there is no clear narrative, it's incoherent. And he looks at the color white in China for making porcelain. I don't know if I'm going to make sense of this, but there's something that, like you said, that echoes his book, where you find broken pieces of pottery and the shards rather than the whole piece. has these sharp edges and has a shape, and using white, and then he brought in black. I don't know, there's something about you saying, because he had a Jewish history of trauma, of his family being annihilated. There's a link about remaking, redoing in the midst of being attacked and under physical threat.
Absolutely. This reminded me in turn of my cousin Irina, who's in her 50s, and she's a trained psychologist and now training further in Berlin. But she's been helping families who have gone through hell on earth in Mariupol, for example, Eastern Ukraine. So she's doing volunteer work with them. And she's doing quite a lot of art therapy, but specifically, she says mosaics is something that is extremely helpful. As you say, finding those sharp little pieces and trying to piece them together. She says that it's been extremely helpful. And in the northern town of city of Kharkiv, which is by the Russian border and which gets pummeled every day, every week I have a lesson, an art lesson with a young woman who's 21. She's an artist, Valia Hook. She's incredible. What she's doing now, the apartment where she lives, the windows got blown out by the blast of the missile. And what she did was, she's very strong, she takes no prisoners. She picked up the shards and she said, and she started making these mosaics, basically a tree of life. So like Ukrainian traditional patterns, but in a more modern way. And she puts them on a canvas, essentially, on a hard wood canvas. And then she sticks them all around Kharkiv for people to enjoy as a kind of a gallery. And the shots that she uses, she puts those artworks on the walls near where they were destroyed.
God, it makes me cry. That's
It's
so beautiful, so meaningful. So psychologically, what I am beginning to kind of stitch together with you is, whilst we can't stop being attacked or being at war or things being broken, there's a way that we have to face that and to kind of allow it. But there's also a unique force about being human where we can turn to lifelong traditions and ways of being that bring you home, that you find your home in yourself, even when your home is invaded.
absolutely, especially when your home is being invaded and broken. It becomes an act of resistance and resilience, as well as a healing act. Reconnecting with my culture, which, as I discuss in my memoir, Strong Roots, I talk about rediscovering and reclaiming everything that we've been deprived of during the years of the Soviet Union, for example. Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture have all been squashed, and east and southern of Ukraine were very heavily Russified, and we were deprived of our culture in many ways.
Like whitewash.
Exactly, but rediscovering it now as a form of therapy, but also, reclaiming that knowledge, it's so meaningful. And I think a lot of Ukrainians are doing that now, and it's very good to see.
Incredibly sort of act of defiance. But you talk with reverence, and in your book, about your mother, your grandmother, how they have influenced you and the emotional inheritance they passed down to you. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Oh, emotional inheritance is such a beautiful phrase. So my grandmother, Lusa, my mom's mom, was the matriarch of the family. I think in quite a lot of Eastern European countries, well, especially Ukraine and Georgia, from what I've witnessed, after the Second World War, when the men came back, they were traumatized in so many ways, and they really went into themselves. The culture also didn't really allow them to maybe process those feelings. But women,
Because they had to be strong men, kind of thing.
exactly. But actually, my grandfather Victor was just very quiet and subdued. I think he was suffering from all sorts of, PTSD, etc. But grandmother Lucia, who herself has gone through unimaginable horrors, including being deported at the age of 11 with her siblings and her mom to the northern kind of parts of Russia. And she survived. So she survived the deportation. She survived Nazi occupation. She survived the Soviet occupation. She had 6 children. She
Whoa. She
she
didn't just survive,
she did, and
she multiplied.
she multiplied, and she had this kind of a homestead, almost small holding that she was looking after with animals and plants, etc. And she also had this underground business in the USSR where you were not allowed to have your own kind of trade, but she did. She was just this incredible woman, very prolific, very kind, but also, straight back and formidable in a way. But you could always feel this humanity, as you say, the emotional heritage, this emotional intelligence that she had was some of the most impressive that I'd ever witnessed. And I feel like she did really pass it on to her children and then to us as well. She was never embittered. She was never hateful. She was not resentful. And I think that's what gave her strength and that's what helped her survive.
It sounds in a way that her courage comes from a deep love and the love of producing and a kind of love in defiance. So it's not from hate, it's from, I'm going to love my kids, I'm going to make stuff, I'm going to sell stuff, I'm going to,
Absolutely.
it's sort of, and that's a radical act of defiance, but through love.
Yeah, I guess there is a bit of a cult of life in Ukraine in general. We're life loving.
You've had so much trauma as a culture, as a
Yeah.
people.
And when she did in my book, I do say that I understand why her and Victor wanted to keep creating life. I don't think that having those children was, an accident or whatever. I think they did actively want to have 6 children. And she actually nearly adopted a Cuban orphan as well after she's
Well,
already had the 6 children. And her oldest son, who was already an adult by that point, said, "Mom, come on,
enough
we need
already.
to, yeah, you need to look after these ones." Because for her also it was so important to give them education, to give them a really good life, the best life that they could have. And she did everything, but also took care of herself, which is another lesson that I've learned. I didn't know this about her, but my mom tells me this story about how she would say sometimes that she had heart problems and she would have to go and lie in bed for the day. But actually, my mom was a medical professional, and now she knows. She's like, she never had heart problems. She just had to say it to kind of excuse
Give
to have this
herself
day off.
permission.
But
Yeah.
yeah, she was just exhausted, but she'd be like, okay, my heart is not feeling well today, so I'm
True.
just gonna go lie down and you kids make food. So my mom made her first borscht at the age of 7, and she just kind of also guided them into this independence by having those rare but still days off. So it's something that I connected with recently as well, and just thought, you know what, it's okay if you are absolutely exhausted physically and
Overwhelmed.
mentally,
Yeah.
have a day off.
Yeah. Just go and lie down.
Yeah.
Nobody dies.
No.
Just
No.
stop.
No.
And your mum, so is she similar, different? I mean, you have this force. I can feel it through the screen. I can feel both the way you feel things so deeply. You feel the intensity of the pain and the loss and the fury that you feel against this outrageous invasion. And also you have this life force to keep going, to make stuff, to write another book, to look after your kids, to paint the door.
Life force, again, is a word that I've grown to love in the last 3 years. And knowing about all of the experiences of Lucy, and knowing what she said before she died, she said, "Olu, if there was a chance to relive my life again, but I would have to go through all of the horrific things
Bad
as well.
things
If
too.
this is the only way to relive my life again, I would relive it again." And that kind of really stayed with me. And I just think whenever I feel now completely down, depressed, and sometimes I can't help it, flattened, I go back to her words and I think if she survived everything, then I have to do whatever I need to do to make myself feel better and alive again. And it actually gives me so much strength. So that life force, it does live in me. It lives in my mom too. I think it's much harder for my mom because she did lose her home, everything that they worked for and on for the past, they're 68 now. They
Yeah.
had this incredible house with a beautiful garden. And like
Oh,
anyone in the UK who's,
and I
a
would be
pensioner,
devastated if my house was taken away. Utterly devastated.
and for
And
them as well, it's not even the house. As my dad said, he said, look, if they bomb the house and we are able to go back and all of the walls are destroyed, he's like, it's fine. We'll build something smaller and that's not a problem. For them, I think it's the trees, the garden that they've planted. It's so important to Ukrainians, this connection to nature. Again, going back to that
growing.
regenerative life and death cycle
Mm.
almost, and growing things. It's a life-giving thing. And as soon as spring and summer come, I think for my mom for the past 3 years, these are the hardest times because she knows that her garden will be coming into bloom, or is it, or because the road where the houses is blocked, so even the people that remain can't go and check whether it's still there, whether it's all been destroyed. We just don't know. And for her, that's, I think she really suffering at the moment.
That's a death for her, isn't it? The death of her garden. It's a real deep grief. And what you're saying brings to mind this idea of eros as the life force for connection, for creativity, for love, for rejuvenation, regeneration, and thanatos, the force of death, of ending that, we will all die. Part of life is death. And these are the twin forces, and you can't have one without the other. But if you face thanatos and allow yourself to kind of feel the fury or the grief, eros is round the corner, but you can't block it. You can't, if you avoid thanatos, you actually also cut yourself off from eros, that you need this broad spectrum to allow the two to move one in and out of oneself.
This is so beautifully put. Visually in my head, I imagine two lines kind of going parallel to each other in my head. And this is my safe space and my happy place, so eros, and then I just see it as the good and the terrible. And I realize that this is life, and some people get to it maybe a little bit later. I always imagine that I will be in this place of extreme grief maybe when one of my parents dies, and that's what millions of people are experiencing all over the world. As you say, everyone is in some kind of a war because grief is the same everywhere. But basically now I find that it's my job, my mission to exist, and to go from one line to another. So kind of
To move,
to move,
oscillate.
oscillate between the two spaces. Yeah, but you've put it so beautifully with your metaphor for Eros and Thanatos. Thank you. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, really hard, but I think words often are poor in us finding ways of making meaning or connecting with ourselves. But words that paint images, which Eros and Thanatos do, that also are steeped in, Greek mythology from centuries ago, that remind us we've been struggling with this since we've been walking on two legs. I think there's something very profound in that.
Yeah, and archetypal. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
and it links to Jung, right?
yeah,
So
I
you
know
must have been
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
in your 20s, you were anxious and you had this hum. I mean, some of it was from the fear of when Russia accessed Crimea, but also I'm sure transgenerational trauma through your family history that maybe you weren't so aware of. But what do you understand now about courage that you didn't understand before?
Oh,
Or how to survive? Maybe the two things are connected.
this is a difficult question in a way. I don't know if I'm there yet. I think I'm trying to. A lot of the courage that I feel like I've experienced has almost been a physical force for a while. When you go into the fight and flight, there's just something just
Adrenaline.
so adrenaline driven that there's just no other way. Either you go with it or you're just completely on the floor and you can't do anything.
And you were on the spin. You raised £100,000 for the military equipment, cooking, speaking, going on TV, making. But it must have been almost like an out of body experience. You were
That's
just
right. Yeah, I think that's it. What I'm working towards now
Which is thinner in a way. It's
Yeah,
more febrile, it's more brittle.
it is. It is. I think it was. I'm pretty sure that it was you who told me about the psychiatrist, the Holocaust survivor. Is it
Oh,
Ethel?
oh, Edith Eger.
That's it. Right.
She wrote a wonderful book called The
That's
Choice.
it.
Yeah.
So I'm not there yet. I think it's a
No,
long journey.
it's
And
a
it's a
lifelong
lifelong
process.
journey. So for the listeners, what I mean is that not to be stuck in that space filled with hatred. As my mom said recently, she said, Olia, hatred can be a very useful thing short term, and a survival
Yeah,
tactic.
it's a
It's a
force. Yeah.
force, but it's very important not to let it linger within you, or for you not to linger within its kind of space.
Can't live there.
You can't live there. And I met a Ukrainian the other day, an actor who we talked about this, about hatred. And he said hatred for him was an emotional connection to the enemy. He said, I don't want to be connected to them, and I don't want to live in the same space of hatred as they do. And I found that a really interesting thought. So for me,
It
again,
connects me to a psychological kind of understanding, which the opposite of love isn't hate, because that does keep you bound. It's indifference.
that's
It's
it.
like, huh,
That's it. Elif Shafak said exactly that recently. She said it's not good against evil, because really, how many evil people do you see in the world? Truly evil people do you meet in the world? She said it's good against numbness, against isolation, and just not wanting to know, or not kind of finding an empath within you. So yeah, I agree.
the Edith Eger message, when it's to kind of get to the root of the process that you're in of finding your courage, is finding ways to choose to live in the present, to choose to have hope. Fill in the gaps.
Yeah, living in the presence, because we at the moment we can't even live in the future. I feel it's not a possibility for us at the moment, not in a normal way. And it's actually a really difficult thing for humans, I feel, to be experiencing. We don't have a normal life where we just think like, oh, we're going to go
Next year
on
we'll have a
holiday, or
holiday.
we're going to do this or that, or plan. There's no planning. And in a way, that's something that is a mental health kind of trope, right? You to be in the moment, be mindful. Yeah, all of this mindfulness, but at the same time, if you don't have a home, like my mom doesn't, and
Where's she living, your parents?
she's in Berlin. My mom is in Berlin with my cousins, and my dad couldn't stay in Berlin, so he's back in Ukraine. He couldn't stay because he didn't have a sense of purpose there. He said that he was going
Yeah.
to die from depression if he stays. And he's of the generation of Ukrainian men that he wouldn't even pronounce the word depression ever in his life, even though he's experienced it. But that day he called me and he said, and I could see it in his eyes, he said, Ola, if I stay here, I will die from depression. And for me, that was an immediate signal. Okay, he means it. He really means it. So I tried to convince him, like, oh, but the German health care, and you're going through these Parkinson style tremors, and how are you going to go to Ukraine? What are you going to do? He's like, no, I need to go to Ukraine and I need to do something. And, people talk about the sense of purpose. I think there's also this Netflix documentary about the blue zones. And one of the
Yeah.
outtakes was that, a sense of purpose is something really important. And I don't think I really understood it fully until my dad literally went back to Ukraine, and he's an engineer. So he bought a dilapidating tractor and he's turning it into a minesweeper, into a driverless minesweeper at the age of
Cool.
68. And he's honestly,
So cool.
I can see it from him. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't let on all of his feelings, and I'm sure he's suffering too. But compared to what he was like in Germany, and actually compared to all of us, I can see that within him, his spirit
He's
is,
making a difference.
he is, and it's healing. It's healing him. Definitely, it has this incredible effect on him. So,
Wow.
sense of purpose is so important, especially for someone like my dad, I think.
And does that, I mean, this may be a bit clumsy, but that sense of purpose of having a son with Fragile X, a genetic condition that you have you got a clear purpose about how to parent him, how to support him? Do you want to explain to listeners a little bit what it is? It's a genetic condition, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking that. Not clumsy at all. So 6 months into the war, we found out that Wilfred has a genetic condition called Fragile X syndrome. I thought it was autism. Autism is actually a comorbidant of this condition. So 50% of Fragile X kids also have autism. So it means developmental delay, speech delay, soft, kind of very mobile joints, and a bunch of other things. Been told by doctors that he will never be independent, or at least he will never be fully independent, and there will be carers for the rest of our life. And
Can he speak?
so at first, you know, you can imagine on top of the war. And plus, it turns out that because I am a carrier, my period stopped. So I started going through a full-on
Menopause.
menopause because of this
Whoa.
condition. So a third thing that added on. So apart from everything else,
My
my
God.
hormones and
I want
everything,
to
I'm on a
going
13
crazy.
now, and it's good.
Good. Phew. Good.
Phew.
Phew.
But yes, going back to your question about the sense of purpose and my son, for ages, I will not lie to you, it was extremely hard. Again, it was another sense of grief because you imagine a certain life for your son and for yourselves as parents.
An image of the future that you had every reason to expect.
And
Yeah.
lack of understanding from medical professionals and not having a community. And I felt like I was flapping
So
on top of
alone.
this massive ocean, you know, but panicking a lot all the time. And I think now I might be going through the period of acceptance. So I haven't completely accepted, but I'm very much, pretty much there.
Wow. Good for you.
Yeah. And I feel so strong. And I actually refuse this idea that he will not be able to be independent. And I'm doing absolutely everything in my power.
Warrior mother.
I am. I'm not giving up on him. People can say whatever they want. They've only kind of.
I find doctors so fucking patronizing so much of the time. I mean, I
Me
literally,
too.
some are amazing.
Some are
Makes
amazing.
me so
NHS has
angry.
been incredible in some bits, but unfortunately, with how the news has been delivered to us and everything, and not helpful at all. But
Blunt and sort of fixed, like this is what's going to happen, this is the
yeah,
outcome.
so they're developing drugs that might help him. There are trials that are
Wow.
happening now that might raise IQ, but also for me, and this is obviously it's very, very personal thing, and maybe this is not advice for everyone, but I think it might help some parents whose children are autistic as well. Digital kind of detox, like Wilfred, it's hard, but Wilfred has a 1970s kind of upbringing, as I call
Nice.
it.
Good.
There's no phones. He doesn't know what an iPad is. I just feel like for his brain, it's everything is already so overwhelming. All of the information that he has to take in like this. And so we don't have any digital. Sometimes we watch a film together, and of course, like that's absolutely
That's
fine.
fine.
But he doesn't stay on the screen. And that's one of the, and also food and cooking. Obviously, it's easy for us because it's our profession. So we cook at home all the time. But he's amazing and he loves it so much. And it's such a sensory thing. Again, being in the garden, I enjoy it myself and I always get him involved. And, you know, we grow all of these herbs, things that are easy to grow because life is incredibly busy for us. But I just stick things in and they just flourish wildly among weeds and other things. And, you know,
How
we go out
gorgeous.
in the summer, in the evening, and we pick these herbs and he smells them. And
Yeah.
so I'm not giving up on him.
So shall we talk about the psychology of food and cooking and your garden?
Yeah.
Because that very much connects to the life force, isn't it? It's a way of loving, it's the way of producing, it's the way of surviving, and the way of caring. Tell me what it does for you, and so we can understand.
So, just a very quick background on Ukraine. I think everyone, even those who live in the cities, just have a very strong connection to the land, so to speak.
It's a very fertile country,
It's a
isn't it?
very fertile soil. It's called Chernozem, which means black soil. It's 20% of the world's Chernozem is in Ukraine. So literally you drop a seed and something flourishes, you know,
Gross.
something grows.
Gold.
And in the south of Ukraine, where I'm from, it's also extremely sunny. It's almost like Mediterranean climate, and it's very fecund, like my grandmother. And she was very much into growing. And after her deportation, she worked in a flower nursery. And she really fell in love with growing flowers as well as different plants for eating. You know, she used to sing to her flowers. And of course, now we know that
Gorgeous.
there's scientific proof that plants actually do respond to
Or
sounds. So she sang to them, and that has been such an inspiring story to me. So
gorgeous.
as soon as we moved into my home here, it's a small background, back garden in London, but I took out the lawn. I didn't want this empty space. That's nothing to me. And we've put this oasis in. So, as I say, wild kind of flowers. It's a bit of a meadow, rhubarb, chard, kale, loads of medicinal herbs, everything that smells and looks beautiful. And I use it in my cooking. And it's a very meditative thing to go there and then in the evening and listen to birds, because as soon as you
Quite
have
soothing.
exactly, our perception of life is so kind of like, oh, I don't have time for this and this.
Crazy.
We need
Mm.
to find time for this, I believe, because so much of our health also depends on these practices, on cooking for
Yeah.
our family rather than buying some
Yeah.
rubbish from
Yeah.
somewhere. So it's huge for Ukrainians, and I practice it at home all the time, and my kids do as well.
So link it to your beautiful new book.
So the family memoir is called Strong Roots.
Great title. Good
It was a
title.
working title, but then the publisher was like, well, it literally is what it is.
But
And my grandma, Lusa, said, and actually my mom remembered about this when the book was already finished, but she said, oh yeah, she used to say this thing, that as long as the roots are strong, the biggest storm can come and it can blow off the petals and even snap the stem. But if the roots are strong, then something new will grow again. She was a poet, my grandma. She was
yeah.
really fantastic.
Yeah.
And
And she's
it's
in you, Olia. I can see her in you. You are fantastic
oh,
too.
thank you.
Given you a lot of herself, it feels like.
So it's 100 years of family history and all of the things that we talked about, like the Ukrainian traditions of painting and embroidery and music and everything else, that I've put research into all of these things in general, and also interviewed my family members and dug up old kind of dictaphone recordings of my big family
Oh, wow.
around the table. And this is, for us, I think it was therapy, but uh, therapy is a nascent thing in Ukraine. That
No.
psychotherapy, it's becoming really big. Even the first lady, Olena Zelenska, has put in some funding into this amazing podcast called Простыми словами, which means in simple words, where the psychiatrist and the writer interview psychiatrists all over the world, and they talk about the war in Ukraine. And it really helped me actually listening to them. It's being born in Ukraine almost, but
As an understanding of oneself to support oneself.
exactly. But
Mm.
back in the day, when I was growing up, we would all sit at this long table under the walnut tree with a big extended family, and it would be all in one. We would cook, eat, the adults will have a drink, kids would be there absorbing,
Playing.
and they would tell the same stories over and over again. And they were amazing storytellers as well. And sometimes they'd cry, and sometimes they'd laugh. And when we were little, it was a bit disconcerting. Like, oh my God, they were just laughing with tears in their
Not
eyes.
in the
And now they're
present. Yeah.
crying with tears in their eyes. But now I realize, and that's obviously over romanticize it. It's not like it cured us completely, but it was a therapy of sorts. And I
Of
feel
course.
like being around the table is a therapy of sorts to people
It
perhaps all over the
is.
world.
It is. And it's free to all of us.
And it's
You
free
know.
to all of us. So yeah,
Well, if you have a roof over
yeah,
your head and a table.
yeah.
But I think what I take from that psychologically is that the physical presence of being around a table, your feet under the table, with a task of making something, eating something, clearing something away, is a metaphor for everything about life. It's like this sense of belonging. You and me, I'm you. We are in this together. And I'm going to tell you my stories, pass them down. I will die, but I'm passing them to my grandchildren. They will have their version, they will die. So it feels like a very significant metaphor for family, for life, for generations, for connection, for love, for bonds, survival and dying.
In my book, I talk about the most extensive hour of my life when back in my 20s, I was a single mother to my son, and I was going through some really difficult times. And I thought, okay, I need to go and have this psychoanalysis. So I went to Hampstead to this very renowned, kind of amazing psychotherapist. which I couldn't really afford, but I collected this money. And I went to see her, and she asked me all of the normal kind of questionnaire questions, do you smoke, do you drink, etc. And then she said, any religion, if any. And I just blurted out. It was the first thing that came out of my mouth. And I just said, my family. And I don't know, maybe she didn't judge me, but I did see her kind of like dot her eyes around a little bit. And I just thought, oh gosh, afterwards I was cringing. I just thought, did that sound cultish? Because I didn't have time to explain to her that in Ukraine, for example, before Christmas, we would put a plate of food and a shot of, vodka, whatever it
Vodka.
is, at an empty space at a table to honor and remember
Your
all of
ancestors.
our ancestors. We have this really deep connection. And to me, as I say again in the book, that I never prayed to a crusty old man on a cloud. For me, it was my grandmother's always.
Gorgeous. Oh, that's so moving. That's so lovely. So, Olia, tell everyone that's listening where they can find you. Your book is out in every bookshop, but it's online.
Yeah, it's online. And if you can, please, support independent bookshops. And Waterstones have my signed books. The book is called Strong Roots. And I'm also online on Instagram as Olia Hercules altogether. I'll be cooking in London and sharing my stories all over the country. And I just wanted to thank you, Julia, because it felt very meaningful when we met the first time, and you did help me a lot. And I have been following you, and I hope that you're okay as well, because I've been following what happened to you, and it's so good to see you looking so well. And I'm just really thankful that you had me on again.
Well, I remember our conversation. It was very meaningful. And yes, I'm on my way. I'm not quite there. Yeah, I'm getting better. And what a joy it has been to meet you again. And I hope I can come and find you on your book tour. So I'll look at the list and see if I can come.
I hope to see you and feed you at some point too.
I'd love that. Thank you, Olia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hello, Sophie and Emily. Lovely to see you and to talk about my lovely conversation with Olia Hercules, who I must say has a high rate of big life challenges, war, and her son having this condition. And, well, both of those things, really. What were your thoughts?
I mean, one of my thoughts was just that, really, that sometimes I have this with clients as well, where you're like, life can just be brutal, when you have a client and then another thing happens and another thing happens. And there's no rhyme or reason to these things in people's lives. I think often we're looking for why me, that feeling of like, why me? I've had enough, thank you.
Things happen for a reason. I really don't think that, or, that they come to you because you can cope with them. I think all of those sort of expressions are so unhelpful. I think bad things happen for no good reason randomly.
I think the thing that's intended sometimes in those comments, which I actually think is helpful, which is sort of what you touched on with her talking about her father, was that meaning is such a sustaining thing that allows us to tolerate what otherwise we can't tolerate. We've mentioned it before, the sort of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, but that kind of core message that if we can make meaning out of an experience, it doesn't make it better or less painful, but it does allow us to live alongside it more easily, I think.
Yes, and not particularly like necessarily in Olia's case, but I remember on the podcast before, people have had terrible experiences, and quite a few of them have said, this was a terrible experience, and if I was to do my life again, I wouldn't undo it. Like, I would not wish it on anyone, and it made my life go in the direction, or I learned this from it, or it gave me this perspective that, like you said, Soph, that there was sort of meaning made from it. So I think you're right. I think sometimes it's an incredibly irritating thing to say, but I think that is kind of what people are getting at. And for Olia, she's in the middle of something traumatic, so there isn't a sort of lens of looking backwards.
Perspective. No.
She's in it, and exactly what she said is that there isn't a future. It's about, how do I manage living in my present? I can't think about the future.
And there's such an extraordinary creative resilience she has, and that her family and the generations of her family seem to have had that sort of creativity.
And in the DNA of Ukrainians.
Yes, and in their cultural heritage, and how
Mm.
you had lots of metaphors, didn't you? But that sort of the sort of stitching together. I was thinking about how split, when you've been sort of forced to leave your land, your home, and she's away, but she's sort of split, isn't she? Her family, her mum's in
Her soul
Berlin,
is in, yeah.
she's got family and her old home in Ukraine and people she loves and cares about. That thing of stitching and embroidering and making is such a helpful healing process. And I don't know, it brought me back to a very trivial memory of university, of having a big argument in my first few weeks at university with someone who was arguing with me that creativity and art was sort of an indulgence and a kind of nice to have, like it was decoration, not serious. And
on the surface of life.
Yeah, it's like, oh, how frivolous, how making something look pretty, And I think this was such a beautiful example of the potency, like how it can play a political role. It can be a form of resistance. It can be a form of healing. I also thought we are not a particularly creative family.
Well, weirdly, I wish my mum never stopped sewing and stitching. She was such a big knitter and sewer, and actually she painted, and her brother who died was a musician. So I think it's me that hasn't. And I did try, I've taken 50 years to not finish an embroidery I started of a rabbit. It's still in a bag with the wool, and I've done half of it.
Yes, I think she was so beautiful to listen to, and like you said, that's such a creative world that she lives in. Like sort of repainting her door, and
I love that.
I think it's, when you're talking about the stitching, it's also that thing of when you've been displaced, the sort of roots, the connections to home become so much more important, because that's the part that you can control, isn't it? The importance of carrying it on, of carrying it forward into the future, the wisdom, the traditions become kind of so much more significant.
And food,
yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of grief generally, right? Is that often those are ways that when there is loss of something or someone, doing the things that connect us to them is one of the ways of grieving, of loving, of remembering. Like, we had this nanny Eileen, and she made us Smartie chocolate cakes for our birthday, and I made the Smartie chocolate cake for my children's birthday every year. And it's the only cake I ever bake in an entire year. I'm not very good at it.
There is always a drama. Sophie has never successfully made a chocolate Smartie cake before like midnight. So, oh no, I've forgotten something.
Also, it's always so thin, and then I'm like, oh no, now I have
That's
to
like
make
me,
another sponge
darling.
because I can't cut that one in half because that is not fat enough.
That's why it takes you forever.
Anyway, it's an act of love and remembrance.
It
even
is.
if
It
it's
is.
not very good.
No, but
that,
I mean, in a
but
way,
like-
that's even more love that you're not that good at it, but you do it
And my
anyway.
children are young enough not to care. They're just pleased they're getting chocolate cake.
Yeah, with Smarties. They just eat the Smarties anyway. They're just so happy. But I mean, we're laughing and teasing, but also it is significant. And it's another way of having meaning, isn't it? Because sometimes when people talk about meaning, I never really know what people mean when they say it gives it meaning. I can see that with her father, changing a tractor into a minesweeper gives him a task that gives him meaning because I'm making a difference. But when people say to you, gives your life meaning, is it that you make a difference to people? Is that what gives life meaning? I mean, I know that is a very basic question, but I actually genuinely don't know.
Well, I think it's quite individual what gives your life meaning.
I think that sometimes it's easier to imagine the opposite of what it feels like when you have this feeling of meaninglessness. I think
Everything's pointless.
what's the point? What's the point of me? What's the point of my life? There's nothing of importance or value of what I do or who I am or how. I think often that state of real depression or an emptiness that people can feel, or a longing, like you sort of know they have meaning, but I think there is an energizing force that people, when they have this feeling that they're the way or they're living or what they're doing connects something that really fits within their kind of schema of meaning of what's important in the world or what matters or what they believe and what they have faith in. It creates a kind of the way I imagine it in my head as I'm talking, it's like a lining up of energy so that it flows.
And it also sort of allows you to tolerate other harder things, because it's like, I got this purpose and I have meaning from this section of my life, whether it's like looking after my children or the job that I do or the thing that I do on the weekend, like doing a high rocks event, that I've got that part of me that feels meaningful. And therefore I can tolerate other parts of my life being really quite mundane
Or difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What really stuck with me is that sort of phrase that her grandma said, that as long as your roots are strong, something beautiful will grow again. And
Beautiful.
it was such a, and like it feels so.
You'd want to stitch that, wouldn't you, into a cushion?
Yeah, if I could stitch, I'd want to stitch that. You know, I work with children, and that's true of all child development, right? Like that, if you can get that bit right from very, very early on and like build a kind of strong, safe foundation, then your children are going to be able to tolerate much more when they get older. It just feels such a thing that you can apply.
Metaphor.
Yeah,
It's a metaphor that you can apply.
Yeah,
but also a sensation that I think that you can seek, maybe, or maybe more from my kind of mind. But that thing of when you feel rooted, when you kind of that you could be like, what would help me feel more belonging, or more grounded, or more in my life.
In the present.
Get your roots in.
Right now, Olia, like she's not in the war zone physically, but her description of it is that she actually is
vicarious
living in a war zone.
Yeah.
That incredibly vivid version of what sounds like PTSD of hearing.
And that was
sirens and feeling like I am in a war zone is such a powerful example of trauma, that when your body is in fear and completely overwhelmed by fear, which is what trauma at its most sort of basic level is, and that actually grounding in those moments is probably your most helpful thing to do.
The other things I was thinking about was how hatred keeps you hooked and does you harm. It gives you that sense of power for a little bit, but actually it keeps you, it's like swallowing poison and hoping the other person's going to die. That hatred is such a toxic thing long term. And we sort of forget that, don't we, sometimes, when we're hating and hating and hating.
And I guess what I heard was it her mother saying that, if we hate them, then we become like them. And not that we can stop feelings of waves of hatred, that happens. We have feelings like that. They come and they go, but we're talking about staying there and cultivating it. And that I think when we really hate someone or someone else, it requires dehumanizing, and that dehumanizes us because we lose connection to the humanity of the other. And I always think, maybe this is a bit sort of general and philosophical, but I always think whatever you believe in and however deeply you believe it, there should always be a part of you that says, but I can't know for sure. Because I think as soon as you are completely certain, then those who don't share in that feeling or in that belief, they become lesser than you and you other them.
I think that's a lovely way of saying it. It's hard to do. It'd be good if there was more of that around the world right now. So, Olia, thank you for such a really wonderful open conversation. Thank you too for your thoughts and your minds and hearts.